Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Pitcast, brought to you by the Pit Crew Online, from the fans, for the fans. I'm your host, Deputy Editor James. With first practice for the Austrian Grand Prix only a few weeks away now, in this episode we'll be giving our preview for the 2020 F1 season. We'll be talking about the emerging shape of the season's calendar, how this might impact on the championship, and also discussing the driver market for next year. And at the end of the episode, we'll make some bold predictions for the season to come. Joining me today is our BTCC editor and the man who patiently edits these podcasts down to a manageable length, Aaron.
Hi guys, glad to be back.
We also have our senior F1 correspondent, Rob.
Hi guys, good to be here again.
And last but not least, our illustrious founder and editor-in-chief, Simon.
Hi guys.
Right, let's get started. Let's begin with the 2020 calendar. Now, this was something Simon and I discussed with Luca a few weeks ago in episode 1 of the Pitcast, but things have already changed since we last spoke about it. To sum up, the Azerbaijan, Singapore and Japanese Grand Prix have all been officially cancelled this year, while F1 has been openly talking to other circuits about finding alternative ways to make up the number of races. At time of recording, this includes potential double headers in Russia and China, a second race in Bahrain around its outer circuit layout, and possibly new races added to the calendar at Hockenheim, Imola, Mugello and Portimao. Simon, as we were talking about this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, I'll start with you. What do you think of F1 potentially going to Imola, Mugello and Portimao this year? And are there any other tracks you'd like to see F1 take this opportunity to stage a one-off race at this year?
Well, it's interesting suggestions. Imola immediately sends shivers down my spine, and not particularly a good way. Obviously, with the events of '94, it just doesn't seem right. But I guess if it can host a Formula One race, then that's a possibility. Mugello, yeah, I mean, why not? It's been talked about before, but never happened. Portimao, I don't really know much about that circuit, to be honest. The ones that pop to my mind are, if we're looking at the Middle East, Dubai has a fantastic circuit that hasn't been used by Formula One yet.
The Dubai Autodrome.
Yeah, I actually met the guy who designed it a few years back, and he was saying he couldn't get on with Bernie, but so that's a potential. I don't know how South Africa are coping now, but I'd love to see a Kyle Army reappear on the calendar. Again, can't see that happening with the COVID situation. That is probably not good. What are your thoughts?
I don't think you're alone there with Kyle Army. I mean, the one that immediately jumped to my mind was Istanbul Park. I think that's another one that quite a few people would like to see come back. But Aaron, are there any that jump out in your mind you'd love to see on the calendar this year?
Well, I have written down Turkey as it goes, and Nürburgring. I mean, it'd be good to have that one back on there if Germany can do it. I put a couple of out there ones on there. I put Brands Hatch. Obviously, it's not able to, but it'd be good to see. And a crazy choice is Bathurst. Can you imagine 20 F1 cars going up the hill in Bathurst?
We talked about that before, didn't we, James? It's almost a dream. I think Red Bull did it, didn't they? Was it Red Bull or Mercedes that I asked you this before, James? And
Yeah, I think Jenson Button went up it, didn't he, in the McLaren?
Yeah, Button set the fastest lap there as well once. So it's a good track. It's long. It's kind of dangerous. Whether it's suitable for Formula One, maybe not. But it'd be interesting to see if they could actually manage a race there.
It's a shame that we never took the opportunity with all the virtual racing to kind of stage an F1 race there. So I know that W Series, I think, are including it in their esports series this year, which would be quite interesting.
I feel like it'd be like Monaco though, where they were just crashing into each other and wall around.
Perhaps. So Rob, we'll pass this next question to you. Obviously, this is such an odd position for the teams and drivers to be in this year, starting the championship without even knowing definitely how long it's going to be. The teams are going to be going racing without knowing how long they need to keep engine parts going, for example, personnel not knowing how long they'll be away from their families, and for the drivers not knowing how many points are on the table. So when do they take risks and when do they play it safe? What kind of surprises can we expect to see coming out of these unusual circumstances?
It's difficult, obviously, for those not so familiar with Formula One. The teams get each driver gets 3 engines per season, and it gets to the point where, if, for example, you change an engine when it's only lasted like 2 races, for example, then you pick up penalties, and that applies with different engine components, gearboxes, for example. So yeah, for sure, it can vary a lot in terms of the teams deciding, shall we change it or shall we just keep this engine. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk as well about the budget caps that are coming into Formula One. So I think teams potentially might actually be encouraged to just try and make their engines last longer. Of course, we're going to be using the same cars next year as we have this year. So I think the FIA will not necessarily legislate, but definitely will encourage teams to try and kind of use as few engine parts as possible. So I think we'll be seeing teams trying to get as much longevity as possible out of their engines, out of the cars in general. Obviously, that's going to be maybe quite difficult for teams like Williams and Haas, and kind of those lower budget teams who struggle with resources, struggle with reliability, and it's kind of a vicious cycle of reliability and a lack of resources to make up for that reliability. So I think, yeah, we're definitely going to see, the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari, I think maybe trying to, potentially, trying to make their engines last longer. But in reality, those teams have easily the resources, they have the money to, to kind of go by the legislation and use engines and gearboxes as they please, essentially. So obviously there's no budget cap this year. That's going to be introduced, I believe, for 2022. With the new regulations. In terms of other surprises, obviously there's been a lot of talk about reverse grid races, sprint races. For example, the FIA are going to look at, how the first few Grand Prix go in Austria and Silverstone specifically to see if anything like that could be plausible. Anything can happen in Formula One, and it usually does, as Murray Walker once said, and especially in this crazy 2020 season. Who knows what's going to happen? We could see anything pop up. We could end up going to different circuits, as you touched on before, like Mugello, Nürburgring. I'd love to see F1 race in Macau. That would be awesome. Whether that would happen or not, I severely doubt it, obviously, because of where it is. But literally anything could happen in this unbelievable year. It's not even started yet, and it's been crazy already. So we will see what happens.
We're talking of 2 races in China. What's happening in Beijing at the moment with the second outbreak, so willing to travel to China.
Yeah, I'm not sure about having. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't even sure about having 1 race there, let alone 2. I think once they decided they weren't going to race there, when it was meant to be held, my first thought was, well, we can't go there at all this year. Obviously, that's where the outbreak started. That's where it's stemming from. And if there's going to be a second outbreak, then there's a high likelihood it's going to come from there. So, I'd be very surprised, to be honest, to see us race at China twice. I'm shocked that they're even considering doing it once. And obviously, it's a situation that's changing every day. So it could be that actually, whilst we're discussing it now, it might not happen at all. I'll be surprised definitely to see us race in China this year, I'd say.
That's the thing that, makes this so difficult to even do a preview for the season, because we might end up with a situation like we had in Australia, where we turn up, the freight's unpacked, everyone's ready to go, and then it's called off because the situation evolves so rapidly. Yeah,
and I think one thing to note as well is that the FIA said at the start of the year that if a team physically cannot compete over the course of the weekend, then they will call the race off. If a team decides that they don't want to race, like McLaren did in Australia before the race was officially cancelled, then it will go ahead. So yeah, it is all a bit is all a bit uncertain, really, as we've known for a while.
And Aaron, with the way that the season's being constructed, with some double headers in certain tracks, others being lost from the calendar, do you see anybody kind of taking some kind of advantage from the unusual way the calendar's being put together? Someone having an advantage at a certain track. The person who springs to my mind is Bottas, where we've been talking about a double header at Sochi potentially. He loves that track.
Yeah, he always does well there. I mean, I can see some teams taking advantage. It's like Austria. I think Red Bull are usually really strong around there. So that plays into Max Verstappen's hands straight away. First 2 rounds, he's got a good chance to make a good start and make a statement to Mercedes. That Red Bull are a competitor this year, not just second or third. They are going to be fighting for that constructors' championship and drivers' championship with Max. There is. I think there is circuits where teams have an advantage. Obviously, I can't put them all in right now, but I don't know. I feel like Mercedes are just going to do what they usually do, underplay it, and then come to the track and win somehow.
They're Silverstone, aren't they? So
yeah, I mean, Lewis Hamilton will probably win them too. But that Mercedes are Mercedes. You can never rule them out. So we just got to see what happens, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's so easy to look at the calendar and think, well, Verstappen won the last 2 years in Austria and was on pole in Hungary, but equally, we could come away from the first 5 races with Lewis Hamilton having won all 5 of them.
Yeah.
Simon, if this year is going to have a drastically shortened season, for example, off the top of my head, 15 races, do you see that offering any advantage to any of Hamilton's challenges? Again, picking up on Bottas, where we see that he has these kind of bursts of incredible form, but over the course of a longer season does tend to ebb and flow a bit.
I really can't see it. I think Lewis is a machine. He reminds me of Federer in the tennis. Tennis. He hasn't, even though the young guns are coming after him, he seems to rise to that challenge, much in the same way Federer does with the tennis. He hasn't dropped off, as we've seen with maybe Vettel. You could see the young challenges came from starting with Daniel, and it pushed him a little bit, and he didn't like it. And then he's obviously got a Ferrari being pushed by Charles, and again, he hasn't responded well. But Lewis just seems to respond to that challenge from other drivers. I don't know what you think of that, but I just can't see, whether it's 10 races, 15 or 20, I think with the same rules and the same car, it's an inevitability. There's not going to be much fight from anyone. Well, there'll be fight, but, not much challenge.
Yeah, I think Lewis is very much at his peak at the moment. He's a driver who's at the top of his game. I remember, obviously there's this discussion about Vettel now. I think he's having more of a slump than Hamilton did. But for example, 2011, when Hamilton had an awful year, he was getting penalties left, right, and centre, collisions every other race with Felipe Massa, and we were all kind of thinking, he can be a bit aggressive sometimes. But then, he's gone to Mercedes and he's dominated. I think he's
great drivers. This happened with Senna. Everyone said, Senna's mad. He's doing this, he's doing that. Lewis did the same thing. Michael Schumacher did the same thing. Oh no, he's too aggressive, he's too mad. Now we're seeing with Max Verstappen. He's exactly the same thing. Someone comes along, pushes that envelope a little bit further, and every other driver who hasn't been able to push it complains. It's just a thing now. I think it takes a while, maybe because of my age, I've seen
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes as a driver, especially up and coming, you've got to be willing to kind of push the boundaries a bit. And the only way, obviously, that a young driver, for example, like a Max Verstappen, can improve is by making some of these mistakes that he has made. But look at him; he's taken his first pole position last year. He's won races with Red Bull. He's completely dominated. He demoralised Pierre Gasly last year alongside him, which was a shame to see because obviously Gasly's such a nice guy, but it just shows sometimes just that bit extra that some of these drivers have. And as you say, Simon, Max has come in and he's made some mistakes. And sometimes, you could say he has been too aggressive. But as a result of that, this race winner and this guy who looks like he could win endless championships has stemmed from that. And it's I think it's a lack of fear of making a mistake that the likes of Hamilton and Verstappen have that have made them stand out over the last few years.
Yeah,
I think it's that kind of quality as well that from someone like Verstappen and also Hamilton and Leclerc that does make them the real threats this season because they're going to be the ones coming in not worrying about whether they're rusty or not worrying about whether they've spent the last 6 months away from a race car. They're just going to get in it and go fast.
And this is the other thing. I think people say what makes a difference with these drivers to make it to Formula One, whether they've got money behind them or not. They're all brilliant drivers. But the outstanding drivers, the Maxes of the world, the Lewis Hamiltons, the Schumachers, the Sennas, and hopefully Charles, they can win in cars that shouldn't win. And that's the only, when they get to that level, I think for me, that's the only difference I can see. If they can just squeeze that extra bit out of a car that shouldn't win. Senna at Donington was a classic. That car shouldn't have won. But, history showed it did. Well, it did win, didn't it? It was the Seeger Trophy. I'm worried now.
Yeah, I mean, if you can win in a car like that, or like Vettel did in the Toro Rosso, you are a great driver.
It's like Alonso used to do it, didn't he? In that Ferrari, I think it was 2012 or 2010. That should have been nowhere near the top, but he was in the title fight up until the last round in both years.
He dragged that thing around the track.
Yeah, I think 2012 Ferrari struggled to get out of Q2 most races. So, to take it to the last race of the season was really impressive. How he managed to do that. Obviously, looking back at it now, the fact that he's only a 2-time world champion with the talent that he had, it's pretty crazy, really.
Temperament thing, I think, got in his way, and then bad decisions. I mean, Lewis, in a way, lucked out going to Mercedes. He could have said, "No, I don't think that's going to win. I'll stay at McLaren," and where would he be now? We're talking about him in the way that we are. So, Daniel Ricciardo, another one. Would he, if he'd gone to Ferrari a couple of years ago, would he be winning? I'm sure Vettel put the kibosh on that. You can imagine. It's like, we're going to bring in this Daniel Ricciardo, your former teammate. Can you imagine Vettel, what he would have said?
He wouldn't have been happy, that's for sure.
I'd love to have been in that meeting. Oh, but that's a very good seg, though, onto, because obviously we want to talk a bit about the driver market as well. And no year of F1 is complete without a silly season. And that's another hallmark of what an odd year this is, that we're talking about the driver market now, which would traditionally be the time that we'd, kick silly season off. But we've not seen any racing this year. We've not seen any of the drivers' current form. But of course, we have to discuss it because of what happened last month with Vettel leaving Ferrari and the knock-on effect from that. Things have quietened down since then. I think everyone's at least waiting for the season to start before making any big moves. But Aaron, let's start with you. Where do you think the next big move in the driving market is likely to come?
I think it's all dependent on Mercedes, isn't it? I mean, they've not come out and said, Bottas is the man. As far as I'm aware, the rumour is Renault are after Bottas to replace Ricciardo, and then that opens up the seat at the big table, which obviously George Russell, I assume, is in a prime candidate for that, being in the academy and having some experience under his belt. So I think it all depends on Bottas and obviously Renault, who they choose, and then there's Aston Martin as well, who are coming in next year, I think. Could they pull out a big money move for someone like Vettel or Bottas? I think Bottas is the key to the next big move, the next dominoes that fall into place.
Yeah, I think, I agree with you on that. I think that Bottas would be, a fantastic choice for Renault. He's obviously coming from a team that knows how to win championships, coming from a juggernaut like that. I think he'd be an incredible asset for Renault. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel for Bottas in a way, because you have to feel that in most seasons in that Mercedes that he's been in, he might have won a championship. It just happens that he was put against prime Lewis Hamilton, one of the best drivers ever in Formula One. I think, without that, particularly last year, if he put somebody of no disrespect to anybody else, but of a lower caliber, Bottas probably wins the championship. He's actually a very, very good driver. But at times, Lewis Hamilton, as Lewis Hamilton does, makes him look not average, because, as I say, he is a fantastic driver, but he really does just kind of brush teammates under the carpet sometimes with his just phenomenal pace. So with that being said, I think Bottas, he is a prime candidate, I would say, for Renault, if obviously Mercedes don't extend his contract for next year, because he's got so much talent. And as I say, I think without Hamilton, and potentially even this year, even with Hamilton as his teammate, he showed last year, particularly at the beginning of last year, that he can compete with Hamilton, and at times he can beat him. So it could even be that he wins the title this year. Now, of course, if he does that, he's staying at Mercedes 100%. If not, if Hamilton stays, I think the issue Mercedes have is that over the last few years, Bottas has been the perfect backup driver to Lewis Hamilton. Ferrari's philosophy over the years has always been that they need a driver competing for world championships and a rear gunner. It often doesn't serve a team. For example, Mercedes had Hamilton and Rosberg. They had Toto Wolff tearing his hair out every race. I think sometimes it serves a championship-winning team to have a driver that's consistently going to be winning races and gunning for world championships, and a teammate that's going to back him up. Now, that's not a role Bottas wants. Bottas wants to beat him and win the world championship. But I guess there's a more realistic possibility. I think if Hamilton renews, Mercedes will probably want to renew Valtteri Bottas, because not only can he, back Hamilton up, he's also fantastic as well at winning races and obviously ultimately winning the team constructors championships. So he would be definitely a candidate for Renault, but I don't think Mercedes are done with him yet.
And I think that's a good thing to pick up on, because they've been, for years now, I feel like every season there's a rumour that Bottas is going to be dropped. And he's going to be replaced with Wehrlein or Ocon or now George Russell. And it's a bit like the perennial rumours of Kimi Räikkönen being dropped from Ferrari, that every year he renewed his contract. Maybe it's just a finished thing. But I do wonder if potentially this year it could be the year for Russell to make the step up. And I'll throw this out to you in a minute, but I know that Russell has a year still left on his contract with Williams next year. And I know that Claire Williams put out a thing last year when the silly season rumours started, saying, we've got George for 3 years, keep your hands off him. But I feel like with the position Williams is in this year, where they're putting the team up for potential or wholesale, it puts Russell's career in a bit of a tricky position. And, Mercedes has been burned a bit with their junior drivers in tricky seats before. They put Wehrlein into Manor, then Manor collapsed. He moved to Sauber, and then they partnered up with Ferrari, and he was left without a seat. Ocon lost his seat at Force India when they turned it to Racing Point. So I do wonder if there's perhaps the opportunity that they might think, to safeguard Russell's career, do we need to take the risk and put him into the car? Simon, what do you think about Russell's potential for moving up the grid, or do you think he'll be staying at Williams for the final year of his contract?
Well, I think he'll be there this year. Next year, I'm not so sure, because I don't know if you read in the press over the last week, Toto Wolff bought back his share in Williams.
Yes, I did see that.
Why would he do it? Obviously, he has some loyalty to the team. You kind of think he's a good guy, but a good guy with one of his potential drivers in that team. And if he's got a controlling interest in that team, and he's running Mercedes, he's going to move that driver. If he wants him, he's going to move. I don't know what's going to happen with Williams. Williams is my team. It's the team I first watched when I started watching Formula One. And I really do believe Claire Williams is the right person. I know she gets a lot of stick on social media from people that know very little. But I really think she knows her stuff. She worked her way up there. You look at her career. She's there for a reason. And she's de facto head of that team now. She's going to need time. She's going to need the right people. And she had Pat Rice for a while. That's kind of worked, but didn't. He's left, and Rob as well. Smedley was there. There's something missing. They've got a brilliant engine. If they had that engine, and they could build a car that could get George up the grid into a points-winning position, I think they'd be more likely to keep him for that third year. But unless they can start scoring points with him, I think he'll go. I would be surprised if he hasn't got some sort of performance clause in that contract. And look how well he's done on the virtual races. I mean, he's obviously a talented, intelligent guy who would 100% suit Mercedes. Whether they want 2 English drivers in the team, that's another debate. But I have my theory on Renault as well.
We'll get to that in a minute. Aaron, you're the one who brought up Bottas being the next domino. If I could press you on what you think Mercedes will do with Bottas, would you be willing to stick to an answer, or?
I may as well nail my things to the post, don't I? Like Rob said, he's got to win a championship, or he's got to do something to show that he is a good driver. He is a fighter. The ruthless streak that we spoke about earlier that Max, Lewis, they have. He needs to show that he has that. Because Hamilton's getting on. I think Bottas is a bit younger than him. So he could have a couple of years leading that team. if Hamilton does trail off, which I don't see happening, to be honest. But with George Russell, I think they've got to put him in a faster car. I mean, it's worked with Charles. They've put him in the Ferrari in his second year and he's flourishing already. So I think Mercedes have a real tough decision. I think, like Simon said, if Williams aren't performing this year and they aren't scoring points, then I think Mercedes have a decision to make. They've just got to put Russell in the car and gamble on it. I mean, they can't do any worse. You know, Hamilton wins the title again and Russell gets a year to develop, and that's fantastic, isn't it? So I could see Bottas leaving sometime soon.
And next year potentially would be a good year for Russell to have his first year at Mercedes, because Mercedes know the car they're going to have next year. It's this year's car. So there's not the usual kind of worry of, are they going to be able to know how to develop the car? You know, the team are going to be familiar enough with it that Russell will be able to have at least a few races at the start of the season to bed in. But it's interesting as well, bringing up, you know, Leclerc going into Ferrari, and also thinking as well of Verstappen going into Red Bull quite young. I've seen a lot of people saying Mercedes should take the risk that those teams made because it paid off putting someone young into the car. But equally, just thinking of, you know, they put Charles Leclerc in the car, Sebastian Vettel leaves. They put Verstappen in the car, Ricciardo leaves after a couple of years. Is there a risk, do you think, with, you know, putting these young drivers in the team that it could blow up and force the established driver out?
I think Lewis wants those records, no matter what he says. Who wouldn't? You know, at least 7, possibly 8. But once he's done that, what's there to stay for? And with his environmental thing and his new vegan lifestyle, I think Formula E, I can't see him racing in any other Formula except Formula 1, but possibly Formula E. So
It would be quite interesting to see.
I'd love to see Lewis give endurance racing a go. Imagine him in Le Mans. He's also kind of tried his hand a little bit in MotoGP when he rid. I think it was Valentino Rossi's Spike last year. So
yes.
I think it would be cool to see him try his hand at that. But yeah, I agree with Simon. It's difficult. You know, once he's established himself as surely going to be a 7-time world champion this year. He's going to exceed the 91 race wins that Schumacher achieved in his career. It's difficult to see him go into anything else. But, you know, I think a few years ago, maybe it was difficult to see Fernando Alonso, you know, leaving Ferrari, leaving F1. So, and now he's taken part in the Indy 500, Le Mans. So, yeah, who knows? We could move on to something else.
Rob, you said about him, plus you'd like to see him endurance racing. I'd love to see him endurance racing, but who would his teammates be? Alonso?
Well, imagine Alonso's face if Hamilton beat him to the Triple Crown.
I think we'll just make Ron Dennis the team principal there as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone would. I mean, listen, Lewis is, you know, he's not quite the Fernando Alonso character. I think he's one of those drivers that, you know, even though you're alongside him, obviously you feel that pressure. Obviously, you know, he's got this aura about him now. You know, he walks in a room, people recognize him. He's a soon to be 7-time world champion, or I'll just say 6-time world champion. So, you know, obviously, you know, people know who he is, people know his stature. But at the same time, you know, if he walked into endurance racing, he wouldn't have the same dominance as he has in Formula One, especially the endurance, the established endurance racing guys. Like, for example, Fernando Alonso, Kamui Kobayashi, Sebastian Buemi, you know, in the Toyota, and essentially just all of the GT guys, LMP2. You know, they have a lot of experience, and obviously endurance racing is very different. To each formula is different. That's what's so good about motor racing. You've got so many different categories, and everyone you go to requires just that little bit of a different skill. So I think for sure, you know, he couldn't just walk into it and be dominant. But yeah, who would be his teammate? That'd be an interesting question.
But to interrupt you again, this is what I really miss is having a driver being able to just go off and race. And like Holt did, he went off to Le Mans and raced in Le Mans whilst he was still a Formula One driver. I would love to see Formula One drivers like, you know what, I'm gonna squeeze in Indy this year, or I'm gonna do Le Mans this year. It would just add so much more to their careers and to the interest of those sports for us, we get much more crossover from people that, there's a lot of people that just watch Formula One.
Mm.
And I remember I started watching IndyCars when Nigel Mansell went over to IndyCar. Until that point, I'd heard of the Indy 500, I'd never seen that. This is, something that really the FIA should move the calendar, adjust the calendar a bit so we can see more of that.
Yeah, I remember when Alex Rossi came over to Formula One from IndyCar in 2015 with Marussia or Manor. Obviously, they were back at the grid, so he wasn't really able to achieve any sort of decent race result. But yeah, it is. You watch him in IndyCar, and obviously he's a race winner there. He's very much a proven driver there. Obviously, that's the point again about each series being different. As Simon says, completely agree. I think it's good to see that crossover. It's good to see drivers switching. I feel like Formula One drivers kind of feel a bit free to go over to other series, but Formula One very much seems like an exclusive group, which nobody else is able to get into from another series. It would be awesome, for example, to see the FIA allow another team to get into the Monaco Grand Prix, for example, or something like that, or for Formula One to do like a one-off race maybe at Le Mans. I know that's a crazy idea, but crazier things have happened. So I think definitely to kind of make Formula One more compatible with the rest of the world, I would say, because you've got things like IndyCar endurance racing where I feel like you've got drivers switching all the time. They're able to go off and do different things, but Formula One is, as I say, I think it's too much of an exclusive group, and it's almost on too much of a pedestal at the moment. And I think that needs to change if F1 wants to survive in the future, because ultimately there's series like Formula E. It's growing massively. And I think F1, although it would hate to do that, because F1's always had this, it's always maintained this proud image of being very much its own racing series. It's, the pinnacle of motorsport. But I think we have to face facts and kind of accept that maybe that's not quite the case anymore. And that's not a bad thing. That's drivers are able to go and do different things. And that can only be positive.
To look forward to.
Yeah, I think you make a good point as well, Simon, about the crossover with the sports. Because I remember when Hulkenberg did Le Mans, that was the first year I'd watched it, because it had been, again, I knew what it was, I knew how to watch it, but I just never got around to it before. And then when Alonso entered the Indy 500, I thought, yeah, I'll watch the Indy 500 this year. And I know that both series had quite a large boost from those appearances. And it'd be great, like Rob said, to see something the other way around as well. Like on the grid for the US Grand Prix, for example, seeing a team fielded with a couple IndyCar drivers entered. I know it's almost impossible to work out how to do it, but it would be amazing if you could.
I used to have non-championship events. I mean, that goes back to before I started watching racing, but I have literally non-championship races because there was too many points, or one would drop off. I don't know. I had some weird things back in the day.
We discussed last week as well, obviously in the esports podcast. If you haven't listened to that, then do go give it a listen. We discussed kind of the crossover between esports and on-track racing, and we discussed how on-track racers are getting into esports and taking part in virtual Grand Prix, for example. And then I kind of brought up the point that it can work the other way as well. It would be cool to see, as Simon said, non-championship events. It'd be nice to see a couple of those come back, and to see if esports drivers can go and make their mark in on-track racing, because that's something that we didn't have before, but we do have it now. And it's like it's a new discipline of racing, and it's a chance to really kind of allow more careers to start and to shine in racing. So there's a lot of possibilities there. There's a lot of possibilities that Formula One has, and I think it'd be nice to see them start exploiting some of those.
I think a good way to do it would be these one-off races, like Le Mans, Bathurst 1000. One-off races where they're not really tied to a contract as such. They can just turn up, do this one-off race, do a bit of testing for preparation. Like I'd love to see like Ricciardo do the Bathurst 1000. Give it it's a different discipline altogether. I know he's driven a supercar before, because he tested Rick Kelly's out a few months ago. He said he enjoyed it. So, he'd love to see that. Charles Leclerc wants to do endurance racing, after doing the virtual Le Mans this last weekend. So, one-off races where they can still do F1, if the calendar permits, and it's just a one-off. Give it a go. They might, it might prolong the career because they might go back to it once they're out of an F1 seat, and they've already got the experience. So it can only be a win-win, really.
Exactly, and I know a lot of F1 teams have been reluctant to let their drivers do it. I know that Ferrari blocked Alonso from doing Le Mans for years, but when you think about the amount of positive publicity that McLaren got, for example, allowing Alonso to do the Indy 500, I really hope that a lot of teams, realise that there's a big bonus to be had there. There's a big benefit to gain from that.
I think it may be just because they don't have their own team in it. Because I think Alonso was a McLaren team, so say Ferrari don't have an IndyCar team, they've not got a real vested interest in the race, apart from Alonso not getting hurt, I guess, or their driver getting hurt. That's
it would open them up to brilliant advertising. There's still a lot of Ferraris and Maseratis in America. Maybe we should go back there for another Grand Prix, maybe Indy 500 again.
Wasn't it Bernie who always wanted the Grand Prix in New York? Like every year he said, yes, there'll be a Grand Prix in New York this year. And there never was.
And sprinklers on the tracks.
The Las Vegas Strip.
I remember there was a race in Vegas. They did it around the car park of Caesar's Palace.
Yes.
Yeah,
was that Keke Rosberg win that?
Well, I don't know. I remember him, sweating and looking. That's where he invented that the cool jacket that you see so many of them wear. I think he was one who wear something like that. Yeah, that'd be a cool Grand Prix, just along the strip. Drag racing Formula 1 cars.
Just straight up, straight back down again. 2
big DRS strips. That's
2 DRS straights, 2 hairpins.
There's a drag strip at Hockenheim, which a few drivers have some very fond memories of. So you could use that as well.
They used that quite a lot last year.
Don't mention it to Lewis.
Going back to the driver market for a minute, obviously a big elephant in the room is Sebastian Vettel being out of his Ferrari seat. There's been a lot of talk about what he's going to be doing next year, about either moving to another team, taking a sabbatical, retiring outright. Aaron, what do you think about Vettel's options for this year? Do you see him really stepping out from F1 for good?
It's an hard one. I mean, the seats that are available as of now probably wouldn't interest Vettel as much. He wants to still be winning races, prove he still can win races. And no disrespect to the teams that are available, I just don't think there's any there that would what he wants to be in, because he's an old school racer. He's not one of these new breed. He is just get in, drive fast, win race, go home kind of person. A Niki Lauda kind of guy. I just can't. I think he'll like Mika Hakkinen. He'll do a sabbatical, but just not come back in the end. Unless Mika Hakkinen's been announced for next year, I don't know. But
I suppose he's never officially retired, has he?
No.
Put him in the Renault.
Oh, can you imagine?
And what about Nico Hülkenberg? He's on the sidelines this year. Do you see any potential for him to come back to the grid for next year, or do you think his chances are perhaps spent now? Let's start with Rob.
I think obviously the seat of Renault is available, but I don't think Hülkenberg would want to go back. I think after the way he left under a bit of a cloud, and I think his relationship with them has been probably a little bit damaged beyond repair now, especially trust-wise. He was a very solid driver for Renault, and sadly, because of obviously first of all, Lawrence Stroll buying out Force India, then becoming Racing Point, and then Toto Wolff had an agreement with Renault that Ocon was going to be in the car, and Renault kind of dropped Hülkenberg. Now I understand, obviously, hands were tied, so it was difficult for them to retain Hülkenberg once that happened. But he's a very solid driver, and he's someone who, for example, I touched on Hockenheim a second ago. I was heartbroken when he crashed there, because it was going to be his first ever podium in F1. He holds that unfortunate record for the most ever races without a podium, and it really sucked to see him go into the wall. My heart sank because. Yeah, he's a fantastic racing driver, and I think that he deserves a seat on the grid. He's always that guy that you can rely on to get consistent race results. So, but sadly, I think, it's difficult to see where he could end up. next year in Formula One. Obviously, Aston Martin's coming in, but I think the expectation is that we're still going to see Stroll and Perez in that car next year. As I say, Renault, I think that bridge has been burned. We'll see what happens with Mercedes. Russell could still end up going to Mercedes. We'll see what happens with Bottas. Vettel could retire. We'll see what could happen. Hulkenberg could end up at Williams in the next couple of years, where he was when he started his career. So I would love to see him back, but unfortunately, I think it's a bit difficult to see that when you've got drivers like, for example, Guan Yu Zhu, who has really proved himself massively in the virtual races in Formula One. I think there's too many drivers who I think are going to retain their seats currently in F1, and I think there's too much young talent pushing up for Hulkenberg to have a realistic chance of a seat again in Formula One. But we'll see what happens. It could be that a chance does open up for him, but he's into his 30s now. I think as much as I'd love to see him back in F1, he's better off looking at a drive elsewhere other than F1.
Could I just pause a second because I really need the loo?
That's fine.
Sorry about that. We can edit that out. Better edit that out. I'll be back in a second.
Again, I might just leave it in.
Yeah, I'd leave that in, mate. Leave that in.
Happy birthday. We'll time you from now. Oh yeah. So you guys, if you owned a Formula One team, what two drivers would you pick?
Oh.
Wow. Is this from the current crop or?
Is it no budget as well? Is it we can for the stars, or do we have to be realistic?
Like, have to be on the current grid or around the car, maybe maybe F2.
Wow.
I mean, obviously you'd want a star man, wouldn't you? You'd want a big driver like Charles. I think Charles Leclerc would be one of mine, to be fair. And then you'd want someone to build the team around him, wouldn't you? And just have like an rising F2 star, or someone who's just happy to be there, I think.
Yeah, I'd be happy to be there, but no one's called.
That's still a contract to the post. I'd say Lewis for obvious reasons. He'd be my first one, and then really you need some kind of backup. But at the same time, you do want two drivers who are going to win race. I would give Lewis and Charles a go. It would probably get very heated very quickly. There'd probably be some fireworks there, but I'd just stick them in the car and see what happens. But yeah, for me, that would be, of the current grid, that would be my team. What about you, Simon? Who would you have?
I'd have to go with Lewis and George. I just think it would be an amazing combination. But aside from as winning drivers, it would be Lewis and George. But the 2021 McLaren team lineup with Lando and Daniel, I just think that's going to be brilliant. And that's
what I'm most excited for, I think.
I'm so excited for that one as well.
We're just asking you, no budget, you can have any two drivers for your team on the current grid or around the current grid. Who would it be?
I think just on current form alone, I'd have to put Hamilton in there. I don't see any reason why you'd turn down a 6-time world champion. The second seat is tricky because, thinking, Hamilton and Bottas work. I'd love to see Hamilton and Ricciardo go up against each other. I think.
Yeah,
maybe a bit biased. Sorry.
I mean, Daniel has said that one-on-one against Hamilton, he can beat him. So I think that'd be cool to see if he could actually do that.
I might be a bit biased because Ricciardo is my favourite driver, but I would just love to see that matchup. Having seen Ricciardo go up against Vettel and drive him out of Red Bull, essentially, go up against Verstappen and be able to hold his own, I'd love to see him take on Hamilton as well.
Yeah, I think one driver that gets underrated a bit is Kevin. He's like you, James. I'm biased because Kevin's my favourite driver on the grid. But yeah, I'd love to see him in a competitive car to see if he could win a race because I think he does go pretty underrated sometimes. He has managed to get some good results out of that Haas. And to be fair, he was competed with really well by Grosjean last year, who he gets a lot of stick, for crashing the car and making mistakes. But he's got a lot of pace as well. He's very quick. There's a reason he's scored a few podiums in that Lotus. So, I'd love to see Kevin in a good car one day.
Kevin in a Ferrari would have been lovely. Well, it's not going to happen now, but to see.
I think
Yeah,
I think he'd be good as a kind of rear gunner in one of the top teams, because you've seen him in overtaking on track before. He's not a guy you'd pass lightly, is he?
No.
If you're coming up behind Kevin Magnussen in a Red Bull or a Ferrari, you'd think twice about going down the inside.
Yeah, he's like an old school racer, and he's a hard racer. So yeah, he's definitely not the kind of guy you can throw moves down the inside of and go, oh, he's going to give me space. You can expect a fight from Kevin, and you'd be naive not to. So I think defensively he's good, but he can also. I remember when he went around the outside of Charlotte 130R, for example, 2018. He then ruined it by crashing into him down the home straight, but. So he can pull off some overtakes. He can defend well. Obviously, sometimes he oversteps the mark. But yeah, it would be good to see how he would get on there.
And it would be good to see him go back up the grid again, because he's, after being dropped from McLaren, he had a bit of a time in the wilderness at Renault, and then McLaren found his home at Haas. But yeah, I'd love to see him get another chance again.
Sorry, James. Just saying, McLaren in recent history of high kick over line, and as well, they just get these young drivers, and something doesn't work, and then they're off, and generally their careers disappear into nothing.
I think the biggest missed opportunity McLaren had was when they had Sergio Perez. I think the career he's had since leaving McLaren, he's been probably one of the best drivers outside of the top three teams. So with he wouldn't have gone anywhere with the McLaren Honda debacle. It's probably better for Sergio Perez that he didn't stay at McLaren, but
Yeah, I feel like over the course, I'd kind of cut me off if you disagree, but I think over the course of that 2013 season, Perez, you'd probably say, was actually a little bit quicker than Jensen. He was very, very competitive with him, and I think all he really had to sort out was that consistency. And I think if you would have given him one more season to do that, I think obviously, McLaren achieved a podium or two podiums in 2014 with Kevin and Jensen in Australia. Sergio could have pulled something out the bag in 2014. So obviously, as you said, Aaron, it all went a bit sideways in 2015. So in the long term, it was probably better that he went to Force India, and he's enjoying himself there. So in the end, yeah, he made the right choice, or it wasn't his choice, but it ended up being a good move for him.
Yeah, that was a classic example of blaming the driver for a bad car in 2013. Yeah. And it was fun seeing him go up against Button, and I remember a move on Raikkonen at Monaco, and just seeing he was prepared to push the envelope. He was prepared to take it to these world champions. It's just a shame the car wasn't really good enough to make the moves stick a lot of the time.
Do you reckon Raikkonen actually did try to punch him in the face after that race at Monaco?
I would not be surprised. So we promised at the start of the episode that we'd make some bold predictions. So it's time to have a bit of fun, but also put our reputations on the line. Simon, you mentioned you had a mad theory about Renault. Do you want to start with that?
There's one driver that has links with the Enstone team that you can't deny, and that's Alonso. And Alonso back to a possibly point-scoring, maybe even winning Renault team would make so much sense. And remember, he's got Flavio still his manager, I believe. You can see it actually happening. But then, if that happens, that does leave Vettel out in the cold. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I think Alonso does want back. It's unfinished business. But personally, I think he'd want the Mercedes seat. I think.
Sorry, Simon. Wasn't Alonso pretty close to going back for 2018, if I remember correctly? I think before, obviously they announced the Renault engines, and I think it was a possibility that Alonso was going to go there, or at the very least for 2019 that he was going to go to Renault. Obviously, they ended up having a pretty average season last year, but yeah, I think it's definitely plausible. Obviously, would he win a championship? Probably not, because I think Renault are still a good 4 or 5 years away from beating Mercedes and Ferrari But that's obviously going to take some development. What makes that easier is that they're a factory team, so everything works together. The chassis, the engine, all comes from the same place, which naturally is a bit easier. They've got a bigger budget as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see Alonso go back there. But if he came back to Formula One, yeah, I think it would have to be something a lot more lucrative, like a seat in Mercedes. But if Lewis is at Mercedes next year, there's no way they're putting Alonso in that car as well.
Not Lewis is there, as you say. My other prediction is Mercedes bound as well. Are Mercedes going to stay long term in the sport? Why are Mercedes giving McLaren their engine? I find that interesting. And obviously they're in Formula E now, and this goes back to what I said earlier. Are they planning an exit strategy?
Yeah, I mean, Toto's put a bit of his money about recently, hasn't he? So it could be that he's trying to, kind of invest elsewhere, and maybe he's slowly disassembling this team. They've just lost Andy Cowell as well from the engine unit. I wrote an article on this. That's massive. I think that's huge news, bigger than what people are making out. Yeah, I think potentially they're not that many years away. I know, obviously, every time the FIA announce a rule change, Ferrari instantly say we're leaving, and here they are still. So I don't know. I think the Mercedes name will probably still be in F1 definitely as a supplier. As a constructor, I think they'll still be there for a few years, but I think maybe Toto Wolff is planning on an exit for himself, but maybe not for the team.
You only go so far. You're winning. There's only one way you can go from that.
Yeah.
They've invested everything. They've shone as brightly as they could. They've sold lots of cars. So now it's almost an ideal situation. Toto's bought into Williams, as I said. Although I've said Claire's the ideal candidate, I'm sure that having Toto possibly helping or even taking a role from her, and then the challenge of building Williams back up is appealing to him. And then, as I said, they've got this, they're in Formula E now, and electric engines for a manufacturer. Formula E has got to be more attractive, hasn't it?
It's on the rise, isn't it? So I think it's definitely challenging Formula One, for viewership. Obviously, they have this leverage where, they're the green version of racing, and it's definitely the future. Unfortunately, the combustion engines aren't going to be around forever. And so electric engines are going to be the way forward. So, yeah, I think Formula E is long term. It's the more investable one. Is investable a word?
We'll make it one. I think it's interesting with Mercedes, because Daimler, I think, came out with a statement recently saying our plan is to stay in Formula One with Toto at the head. That's our long-term plan. We're not going anywhere. But like you said, the Toto Wolff took his first absence from an F1 race last year in Brazil, and he's currently spearheading the Formula E team as well. Like you said, he's investing in Aston Martin, Williams. Andy Cowell has left the team.
Do we know where
Sorry?
You know where Andy Cowell's off to? Is there any announcement on that?
There's not. All he said so far is that he wants to go and pursue other things in engineering. That could mean anything, really. So all we know so far is that he's leaving the company. So he could go off to work in other, performance sectors or anything. But yeah, we're not too sure what he's going to try and do yet.
You can begin to see the dominoes from that. This was the team that Lewis Hamilton joined, was the team spearheaded by Toto Wolff, with the engines headed by Andy Cowell. When those dominoes start to leave, Hamilton said he might leave the team if Toto Wolff left. Then once you kind of lose the core that made the Mercedes team what it was, made them able to win so many world championships, would Daimler be willing to still back the full kind of cost of an F1 works team? Or would they think, yeah, we'll just pare it down to engine supply now?
I mean, you saw it with Ferrari, didn't you? In the mid-2000s, they had the team of Ross Brawn, Rory Byrne, John Todd and Schumacher. Once they all slowly departed, Ferrari haven't really been back to the height of that since. Could we be seeing the same thing happening here with Mercedes? I think Toto Wolff stepped back, hasn't he, from main running of the Mercedes F1 team. I think he's going upstairs a bit. I think I read somewhere. I might be wrong, but these dominoes are starting to fall, like you say. And how long is Hamilton going to stay if he thinks Andy Cowell leaving, Toto stepping back a bit? is he going to stick around? Because he might be worried of what happens once all these dominoes leave and fall.
And obviously, Nicky passing away. That's a pretty huge domino thing. Pretty huge void to fill.
And he played a huge role in convincing Hamilton to join in the first place. Yeah. So, Aaron, what's your mad prediction for the 2020 season?
I think we're going to see McLaren consistently on the podium.
Interesting.
Somehow or somewhere. I just feel it. I feel like they're going to be a lot more competitive. I don't think they'll be fighting for wins as such, unless it's like a fortuitous one where everyone bins it and Ricciardo or Norris or Sainz are there to pick up the pieces. I don't know, but I do feel like they're going to be on the podium at a few races and show they are developing more and more on what they did last season. And I think this one is the risky one. I feel like Williams are going to score more points this year because they look decent in testing, but I know testing is where a lot of people sandbag and don't really prove their pure pace. But I feel something. I feel like Williams are going to just put a few more points on the board than the one that Kubica got last season.
With Russell having developed a bit after his first year as well, being in more of a position to score points, I could see that. It's interesting with McLaren being on the podium as well, just to throw it to Simon and then Rob. Do you have any pick for your, surprise podium finisher throughout the year?
Surprise. Okay, Carlos Sainz. I think back to McLaren, but I think he will be on the podium. Or wouldn't be surprised if he got a sneaky win on his way out the door. Always really rated him. Even when everyone was banging on about Max, there was something about Sainz. I don't know, just an underlying current. You could see something there. Maybe people develop, at different periods in their life. Some people learn things at a different rate, and I just feel that there was just something. There's always been something there, and I think he'll do well this year, and I think he'll do really well in Ferrari in next year. So I guess I'd go with him.
Rob?
I'm going to say Kevin. I'd love to see him back on the podium again. I think it's weird with Haas because they looked good last year in winter testing, and they looked good in Melbourne as well. Melbourne was a good race for them. Obviously, they had their pit stop dramas again with Grosjean, and if not for that, it would have been a really good point finish for them last year. And then obviously after that, the development of the car went absolutely pear-shaped somewhere, and the rest of the season they were horrible. The car was just awful. So it's difficult to really tell this year, especially because obviously as well last year we saw Ferrari we thought they're the quickest team, they're going to win the championship, and then we get to Australia and Mercedes blew everyone away. So yeah, testing is often not something to go by, apart from Williams I think being, was it 3 seconds quicker this year in testing than they were in the Grand Prix last year at Spain, which is crazy. So I think Aaron's point is definitely a valid one. But yeah, I think the signs for Haas were kind of positive. Obviously, they've been released from the shackles of a certain company last year. I'm not gonna mention the name. I don't want to get into that too much. But yeah, I'd love to see Kevin back on the podium.
Do you have any other mad or bold predictions for the season?
Well, the kind of it's not necessarily a completely mad one. I'd say Vettel to win the championship. To see if he can do that. And then drops the mic at the FIA gala, walks out the sport. See you later. Also the other one was obviously Haas on the podium, and so I think Vettel. Obviously, it was a real, he had a torrid time last year, and I think it all stemmed obviously from Germany 2018, and he's never quite recovered from that. But he's had a lot of time to himself, I think. Yeah, if he can kind of get back to the Sebastian Vettel that we saw at Red Bull when he was, utterly dominant and he looks imperious at times, it'd be good to see him win a championship, and you never know. Obviously, he wouldn't stay at Ferrari because they've already filled that seat, but you never know if Mercedes would then be interested. So yeah, my other crazy wacky prediction is Sebastian Vettel to win the championship this year.
I'd love to see that as a swan song for his time at Ferrari.
Definitely, yeah.
That would be class.
And I think even if not a championship win, I'd love to see Vettel be able to win at Monza this year and kind of put that ghost to rest, because he's had a couple terrible years at Monza trying to win for the Tifosi. It would just be great to see him kind of go out on his own terms a little bit.
I think last year was quite symbolic at Monza, really, wasn't it? Because Vettel was the man at Ferrari. He was the leader. He was the man who was supposed to lead them to championship success. And then we saw, a real changing of the guard when Charles won and Vettel didn't even finish in the points. It was kind of symbolic of the fact that things have changed at Ferrari now. Vettel started the season as very much the number one, and the number one now is absolutely Charles Leclerc. I think he definitely has a score to settle there. I think he has to endear himself again with the Tifosi, because I don't think it's a secret that they have started to lose faith in him now. That'll be a big race for him for sure. He'll be targeting that one to win it, because he's not won it since 2013 and he's never won it with Ferrari. So 100% he'll be eager to try and win that one.
Kind of poetic as well with his first win being at Monza as well. So it'd be nice to bookend his career with 2 wins.
Yeah, both of them with Ferrari engines.
Yeah.
Alex Albon could win a race this year.
That would be good. He had a bit of a kind of quiet time at Red Bull. It was a shame he didn't manage to get his first podium at Red Bull at the end of last year, but
Brazil won it when Hamilton took him out last lap.
I think we'll definitely see Albon on the podium this year. It'd be so good to see him take a win as well.
Yeah, I think he looked competitive last year. I think I had a couple of little things where it was like, he took over from Gasly and he wasn't quicker than him, and I thought he was more competitive with Verstappen than Gasly was. And you've also got to consider as well that it was Albon's debut season, and in that debut season he's had to switch teams halfway through it. That's a really, really tough thing to happen for a driver. That's not the kind of thing that Max Verstappen went through it in his second season. But yeah, in your rookie season, when you're only just getting used to Formula One, let alone your first ever F1 car, then you've got another one to deal with for the second half of the season. And yeah, he nearly got a podium. So I thought he did a tremendous job last year. And will he win a race? Yeah, I think he can do. I think it's it'll have to be one of those things where it's a bit of a crazy race, couple of incidents here and there. But yeah, for sure, I think with his talent and his ability, and definitely the performance that we saw him give last season when he nearly got that podium. I think it will be good to see him, and I think it's definitely not outside the realms of possibility to see him on the top step.
I think especially with the tracks that we've got, like starting the season in Austria, if Verstappen runs into trouble, you could see Albon winning the first race of the season.
It's possible. I mean, you couldn't rule it out, could you? I mean, I feel like it goes under the radar a bit, really, with this emerging talent of Brits we've got with Russell and Norris. I feel like Albon does get the short bit of the stick sometimes, even though he is in a very fast car. I think he'll be on the podium, definitely. Wins, yeah, like you say, if Verstappen gets into trouble, it's a lot more clear. But yeah, I won't rule it out. It's possible.
Love to see him win in Austria, and then after the first 2 weekends, Alex Albon leads the Drivers' Championship. Maybe that'll be my bold prediction.
Why not?
You never know. Yeah.
Williams might win. Who knows?
You never know. I mean, George Russell's got 4 virtual Grand Prix wins in a row.
This is it, yeah. Especially if they exploit that reverse grid idea. Could happen. You never know.
It'd be interesting to see the reverse grid with the spread of performance that you have in F1, because you're used to seeing it in things like Formula 2 and Formula 3 where they're spec cars, but seeing like how long a Williams would last at the front.
What would be cool if they did it like they do in the touring cars, where if you win the first race, you then reverse the top 12 in terms of a draw, and then they still have their ballast from the last race, so the winner still has an extra 75 kilos on their car. So the Mercedes won't just speed up to the front. They'd have ballast there to hold them back a bit. So
we need to do for ballast. Even the field out with ballast. That should shake things up a bit.
A couple of literal sandbags in there.
Yeah. A few sharp tacks, and we're away. We'll put them on between us. We'll make it exciting again.
Someone will be bringing up sprinklers again soon.
Go for the sprinklers. Go sprinkler. I love that idea.
Oh. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to leave this episode a like and share it with your friends, and follow the Pit Crew on social media. I've been James. You can follow me on Twitter at James16Matthews. Aaron?
So it's at Aaron Erwin7, 2 A's, 1 R.
Rob?
At Kershaw16Rob.
And Simon?
At F1 Taxi.
Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you out on track.